Hey, what's up guys, this is Vlad Cameron from Dreamlight. In this tutorial I'm going to cover how to render aerial renders using Dash Studio. And I'm going to be covering 5 different techniques, and each one of these is going to have its own lighting system and obviously camera options and so forth. One of the ways is going to be using the Arri Global Illumination system. This is the one you find here in the render settings, right, which has the sky and sun component. We're also going to be explaining or talking about HDR maps for aerial rendering using background photos as a static option, and which means they are non-movable. All right. I'm also going to be showing you a little bit more advanced background photos with some camera freedom, for instance depth of field, and also a little bit of camera movement. This is really cool. And also using Photoshop, obviously with Dash Studio, which is really something that's going to give you additional effects such as foreground, cloud, layers, and obviously backgrounds and all that. Basically how you take a plane or any object and then insert it into photos using Photoshop. And then of course you can use any of these methods or combine them together and create your own creations. So I'm going to cover the basics first. I'm going to jump right into the action using the Arri Global Illumination system. Alright, so let me just put this away. I'm going to load one vehicle. So go to vehicles, and here we've got, if I just click on polish, we got luxury private jet. And pretty much you can use any, aerial vehicle here. I'm going to be using different ones for different tutorials here. And just see if I can locate this one. This is a Stormfall fighter jet. Let's load that one. And let me add a camera. Switch over to the camera preview and zoom out. So upon loading, Dash Studio uses the default environmental map here added. It's kind of like a default light set, if you will. If I turn this off and don't have any environmental maps added to the environment here, which is the sub-tab of the render settings, then you are using pretty much the global illumination system, right? And what it has day, date, time, and so forth. So you can set a different date and also time. The closer to sunset you get, the longer the shadows will be, and there's going to be a different color. Now obviously you don't want to have any ground shadows, and using the kind of built-in Arri global illumination system, it requires that you have the dome on so that you actually see the sky. An issue, or two issues actually, is one, you have a ground here, and it's not very sexy to have the ground on, so to speak, if you are doing aerial renders. Another issue is that we have a shadow on the ground. We don't want that either. So we're going to be tweaking these settings right now. First, scroll all the way to the bottom and turn off the ground. Next, the ground here, we don't really want it to look grayish. So we're going to click on the ground color and change it to something that looks more like the horizon, a little more white yellowish tinted. Let me just do a quick test whether that can be something that looks like a nuance of the horizon. All right, so let's go a little bit broader than that. Almost. And you don't need to have a perfect match. I would prefer this to be a little bit more orangish so that it matches the horizon, so that you have a gradient, so to speak. And then you also want to match it here on the horizon blur. And you want to start off with 1, see how it looks, because that is often what you just need, but sometimes you might even need more to just make it look more fluid, so to speak. And that's pretty much what you need to get those to look great. Now, there's a few things I want to cover using this very system so that you can adjust it and control the lighting and all that. First of all, as I already mentioned, if you go back, let's say to noon, you're gonna get a totally different light that comes more from above. If you look the camera here up, you see that there is a sun up there, right? And this now has a completely different look and feel. And when you have that strong lighting from the top, you might want to tone down the ground color. So in this case, we can just tone it down a little bit, or even more. All right, it just becomes a part of the render. Now bear in mind the ground color casts lighting from below, so you will have this if you place the camera like I just did a little bit from underneath, you're gonna have that color hit your vehicle. So if you just, for example, use green here just for fun, it's gonna be green colored. So you can use that to cast additional lighting off the ground, so to speak. So if the plane is maybe flying over water, you might have a blue tinted thing instead, right? It's kind of depending on what is underneath the plane or vehicle or craft, but also what kind of color does it have. Does it fly really high up in the air? Is it clouds beneath? Is it something else? Is it water or something, or ground or desert? You can obviously have a desert color and create really a desert, look and feel. Great. All right, that's that. Now the camera is pretty straightforward. You right click up here to pan the camera around. You left click to orbit around. It's very simple. Now what happens is that as you rotate the dome, just look at it, dome rotation, you rotate not only the sky and where the sun is located on the sky as a physical item, but also how it affects your vehicle or spacecraft. So for instance, if I just lower this to 1800, it's like a sunset option, right? And if you take a closer look at the ship now, you can see that there are shadows and lighting effects going through here. I'm gonna just rotate this, and you can really sense them, right? Now, as a base rule, this is kind of like a low light source. You can really sense it. It's very low. It's up here, right? It's not up there in the sky. It's down here. As a general rule, lighting is more cooler, so to speak, for aerial renders when it's coming a little bit from the side or from behind. As you can see now, the lighting is straight from behind and it looks very more kind of dramatic, if you will, as opposed to coming straight from the front. Let's see here. Here's straight from the front. It doesn't look as cool. It just looks very plain. So try to have the lighting come at least a little bit from the side, so it creates some tension and nuances and contrast, or slightly from behind, which also adds more dramatic highlights. And as you do that, as you play with those effects, you might need to tone down the intensity of several components, which I'm going to go into right now. So one of the things you can control is the environmental intensity. This controls everything. So if you lower this to, let's say, half, 0.5, you're going to get lower intensity on the sky and the sun. Funny thing happens now. You can go into sun disk intensity and increase the sun. This gives a stronger sun, but keeps the sky intact or the same. So you can pretty much go wild with the sun disk, but keep the sky intact. So if you want to tone down the sky and have a really high dramatic image, you can do so here, which lowers that sky component, and then you can increase the sky the sun dramatically and get this cool effect. So it's really up to you what you're looking for. Do you want that super high contrast render? Do you want to feel the sun and see the sun and get some really cool renders? Do you want that darker, menacing look, or do you want something more brighter? It's really up to you what you're creating. Now, very important here is also another thing. It has to do with the sun disk scale. As of now, it's set to 4, which has a certain effect on shadows. If you set it to 40, you're going to get much larger sun, as you can see, but also much softer shadowing. So now if you get really close to the craft, you can barely see the shadows. I mean, obviously it's still going to be dark here, but the shadows are very, very soft and gentle, as you can see. You can barely see them here on the edges. As opposed to playing with 1, you can now see the harsh, dark shadows here at the edge, right? So that's how you can play and also add that visual sun and have this really cool, menacing look and feel, right? That's how we do it. Now, so where else can we control in here? Well, one thing we can do is to play with the bloom filter. This is a very, very powerful filter. Once engaged, it often has a little bit too low threshold value, which kind of blurs everything. You want to increase that to 10,000 or 12,000 or above. That then tells the software to only play with settings that are brighter. As you can see now, only the sun is affected. Some of the lights here, while the ship or the craft is not affected as much. Obviously, something you can play with is the radius. A lower radius will look cool on these settings here on the lights of the ship or airplane. So if you keep a low radius, you're going to get a nice, very cool glow on these. If you keep it up a little bit, you're going to get a more feeling of almost like a fog effect or very glary sun effect. The drawback is that as you increase the radius and often also intensity, you might overpower the sun so it looks like crazy. You want to maybe counter that with some brightness scale. And if you really go overboard with this, you might also need to remove the sun altogether or just keep it slightly less visible. As you can see, what this does, it creates some haze effect. It feels more hazy as opposed to if I turn it off. Let's just wait for it to update. It looks more clean-ish, so to speak. Just wait for it to update. It's not really showing. There we go. It looks more, you know, clean, right? And if you turn it on, it kind of glows over the ship. Can you notice that? Let me increase the scale so you can see that. You can sense it glowing over the ship here, and it creates just that very nice realistic looking haze effect. But be careful with it because the sun often explodes when playing with those effects, right? So, and all kinds of high drama effects like this one are always best kept at a minimum, so you can place with just a small portion of these bright parts and you should be good to go. So that would be an overkill, right? That's way too much. So you want to control those effects so that they look more natural and they're part of your image. If you have that much strong backlighting going on, you might want to tone down the intensity scale. And in this case, I would just also tone down the radius so that it has a nice glowy effect on the ship and on the light here. So if you want to do more daytime, this was kind of like a dramatic look. We lowered the just look at that, the intensity here, right? And as we keep decreasing that, the darker the overall sky will look like, but you can still play with the sun. Now if you keep it at normal, like 1, you're gonna get a lot of exposure from the ground. It's more like daytime. And obviously when you have that much overall lighting from the sky and all that, you want to tone down the sky component, which we set to 10 when it was darker. So if you bring it down to 1, you're gonna get a more natural look from that. Still, as of now, we're also playing with the bloom filter, right? So you can use that on daytime renders as well. And we can produce pretty realistic images just using this map here. This bloom filter and the built-in Iray global lighting, right? As far as, you know, camera options goes, there is this thing: if you're really close to your ship or airplane and use a wide camera, like for instance this one over here, we got the camera set to 24mm, it's pretty wide, you're gonna get a more like a exaggerated perspective effect, and it has a really cool sense of dimensioning, over dimensioning and overpowering the ship. It might look, if you get really close, you might get really dramatic, you know, angles of wings and all that. And you can also obviously use this to your advantage when being very close to guns. That also exaggerates them, makes them look more menacing, if you will. However, this over exaggerates the ship, and another way of playing with the ship is to be a little more at a distance and zoom in on it. Zooming in will lower the perspective mayhem we just saw, which is also gonna give the ship a more compact look and feel, and it's just gonna look more like a real plane you zoom in at a distance, right? As opposed to being close and zooming out, you're gonna get that more over exaggerated look and feel. So as far as, you know, other camera settings goes, if you're having this really wide angle thing, like right now 30mm, you don't want to use so much depth of field. But when you are, let's say, here and zooming in on the ship, you can still play with, see if I move the camera here, you can play with, I call this the diagonal. So you can play with cool effects down here on the right side and also on the left side. So here I'm placing the blue dot on the upper left corner and the guns on the right lower corner to create an effect. And you can now engage depth of field and use the auxiliary viewport, that's a difficult word for me to pronounce, and use, for instance, hidden line, back off a little bit, and let me just use something else, texture shaded, looks better, and let me zoom out, rotate around so I can just see where the camera is up here, right? And you can now control the focal distance of the camera and set it to, hey, let me do the blue dot here in focus, right? So right now see this red line over here? It goes right where this wing lamp or light is located. And when you're using these effects, you got to also counter with the f-stop. Often when you zoom in quite a lot, like we have done here, you got to increase this value so it doesn't become as dramatic. So now we have a cool camera angle which has the left gun and light in focus while the rest of the ship is slightly out of focus. And obviously you can change that to have the canopy in focus. I'm changing that now. See the red line over here is shifted so it touches the beginning of the canopy, right? There. So keeping this part now in sharpness and this one unsharp. So we can play with those effects and create really dramatic renders, if you will, and really play with, you know, stuff close to the camera, play with stuff far away from the camera and really, create very cool dramatic images. Now we have a sense of sharpness here on the nose and a little bit unsharp wings. So if you have really zoomed in images, this is really useful, the depth of field, right? However, if you're using really wide angle shots like so, don't play with the depth of field. It's not going to work out. It's not going to look any good. So as you see, you can create pretty nice images straight inside Dash Studio just using this built-in Iray global illumination system. One thing you can do still while in here is obviously to play with haze. Adding a little bit of haze would change how the lighting looks like, how the sky looks like, but also how intensely the sun hits your ship. Okay, so I suggest if you're doing these cool images like this one here, going for really strong haze can create beautiful lighting effects, really beautiful. However, the downside of haze is that you will have very little contrast on the shadowing. As opposed to turning this off, you're gonna feel more dramatic shadows and all that. Okay, so it's something you can slightly increase or just go full force and have a very kind of soft look, if you like, but without dramatic shadows, right? But again, it's very beautiful. Another thing you can do is play with blue and red tint. You can have a little more reddish tone to get a really beautiful sunset feel, or a blue for more colder look and feel. You can also move the horizon up and down. That changes the time of the day, but also gives you some really dramatic options if you want to have them. And one more thing is to play with, here in tone mapping, you have vignetting. Vignetting is cool if you want to just tone the edges of the image and focus on the midsection. When you're using a very wide camera angle like we're using right now, you can use a higher setting on the vignetting. When you're zooming in, you have to use a higher number here. Okay, so low camera angle, low vignetting. Very zoomed in images like this one, you got to increase this to make it more visible. All right, let me just go back. And one more thing is the white point. Obviously, if you want to do and recolor your sky, you can go for, let's say, cyanish and get a more red tinted, menacing, well, in this case kind of like a almost romantic style. But the more cyan you keep on pushing, the more reddish and devilish it becomes. So the white point is always the opposite. If you look at the RGB scale, you've got the cyan here in the middle, and then the opposite is red. So if you do something blue tinted, it's going to be the opposite, which is orange. All right, so this is like more warmer tint, and then if you do warmer white scale, they're going to get a colder tint as well. So I'm going to be obviously doing more options inside Photoshop. So this was a kind of intro, if you will, covering a few options using the built-in Iray global illumination system. Now the next stop is using HDR maps. So I'm going to cover all that in the next video. Thanks for watching. See you soon again.